Good morning, welcome back. And I do want to apologize to everyone. After we went into executive section, Senator Benning reminded me that I never made a motion to do so. So my apologies. It was not a mistake on the part of the committee. It was purely my mistake. So we are back from talking about a private matter concerning compensation.
Join the meeting.
Going to move to our next item on the agenda, which is talking about the legislative space study. I like to call Senator Benning and Alice Emmons our space force, as it were. We're going to be, sorry, Joe, I couldn't help it. We have gotten some recommendations from Freeman, French, and Freeman. And as we discussed yesterday, they are simply proposals. These are not, this is not a plan for how we're going to create enough working space going forward to accommodate the needs of the staff and legislators and the public and press. It is just a starting point. Yesterday, the speaker and I had the opportunity to sit down with the two chairs of institutions, Representative Emmons and Senator Benning, and we thought we would have those two chairs speak with us this morning about their thinking on how we're moving forward. In to sort of set us up in anticipation of meeting with both those chairs, the speaker and I sought advice and counsel from our legal team to find out, where does the power lie in making these decisions? Is it with joint rules? Is it with joint legislative management committee? Is it in fact under the jurisdiction of a different committee? And the answers are not easy. It seems like there are some decisions that will be made by this body and some by joint rules and by the Joint Legislative Advisory, State House Advisory. I'm going to just hand it over. I'm botching the name. So I will hand it over to Representative Emmons and Senator Benning to give us a briefing. Thank you.
You want to go first, Joe?
No, I was thinking you're the #1 space cadet in the building, so we probably have you go first.
Well, I'm kind of spacey.
Okay.
There is, in terms of where should the decision lie or the jurisdiction, you know, both the House and the Senate Institutions Committees deal a lot with the construction, and also working with Department of Buildings and General Services is one of the departments we work closely with. And whether or not we agree with some of the directions of BGS, they're the ones who have responsibility of the State House for its operation and its maintenance. In trying to figure out how to move forward, there is currently a legislative State House Advisory Committee that's been in place for years and years. And the function of that is to work within the State House in terms of the furnishing in the State House, the art pieces in the State House, but also in terms of renovations to the State House. And we looked at that makeup of that committee and its functions, and it seems to be the appropriate place that at least some of the preliminary discussions could occur, with possibly some recommendations to the legislative body. And I would also think that some of those recommendations would need to be acted on with the institutions committees, along with the appropriations committees, if we are going to use any of the ARPA funds for any renovations to the State House. And part of those renovations also do include a new HVAC system. That is integral to us coming back into the building. And that started some work on it last year, though BGS has not been working on it as quickly as we had hoped. So I'll leave it at that. So Joe, I don't know if you want to add.
Before we move on, Representative Emmons, can you just brief folks on our conversation in terms of the makeup of that committee and how we might put language in the Capitol bill to expand it just a bit?
So the current makeup of that committee is 3 members from the House appointed by the Speaker, 3 members from the Senate appointed by committees on committees. I don't have it in front of me right now, but it's the director of the Vermont Historical Society. It's the director of the Vermont Council on the Arts. It is the Sergeant at Arms, the Commissioner of BGS. And I think I'm missing someone. It's an 11-member committee.
Friends, Representative Allen.
Friends, right.
Okay.
The trustee Friends of the State House. So sometimes that committee is very active and other times it just isn't active at all. But we were thinking that might be the appropriate place to really start vetting this issue.
And expanding the committee.
Expanding it, one thought was we don't, of the 11 members, there are 6 from the legislature. And the thought was for this particular issue here, we expand it for 1 member for each body. So we have 8 legislators on there. So it's a 13-member committee.
So I see Rob has his hand up. I don't know if he had a specific question.
Well, I do. I'm just curious to know where staff input would come along here. Is it going to be through the Sergeant at Arms, or will they have any sort of a presence?
So one of the conversations we had, there's a lot of interest, you know, it could be from legislative staff, Joint Fiscal Office, security, and other interests, like particularly the Division of Historic Preservation, because we have to be very, very careful on any construction we do in the State House, because there is some regulations there within the historical preservation world and guidelines. So our discussion yesterday was saying, you know, we would be taking, that committee would be able to take a lot of testimony from those folks and assimilate all that information. That was the discussion that we had.
Rob, if I can jump in on your question too, the committees of jurisdiction, specifically the institutions committees, also have the ability to gather information from all of the stakeholders. And there's a lot of stakeholders, frankly. It's not just people working inside the building who are normally working inside the building. There are many elements that come to the State House and participate in the legislative process. But let me say quickly that the State House had space problems before COVID came along. A large part of our most immediate conversation have been clouded by the narrative of COVID and people making decisions based on the presence of COVID. There's a lot of opinions out there about whether we should come back, whether we should come back in some hybrid fashion, or whether we should just presume everything is going to be fine and we go back. And everything in between is part of the conversation. But some of the most frustrating parts of it in trying to get first steps moving are taking a quick look at things like, all right, the HVAC system has to be fixed. What's going to be involved in that conversation? We have on the Senate side, Bobby Starr is in desperate need of a new committee room. The House side, there's been complaints about committee sizes for as long as I've been here. But the immediate focus for BGS right now is trying to decide what to do with the 5th floor at 133 State Street and 2 Aiken, and whether or not there is a conversation to swap the current occupants of 2 Aiken. They would move into 133 State Street, and then there's another conversation about whether we sell any of the properties on Baldwin Street. Those immediate conversations have not been able to come to any kind of fruition because we haven't, until I think last night, begun to really seriously focus on what committees or committee is supposed to be making the call on how and when we're going back. And just as a reminder, we have temporary rules in place that expire upon the expiration of the governor's executive order or the first week in January, whichever comes later. After that, at the moment, I don't think anybody has a handle on what our legal authority would be to say no public is allowed in the building, for instance. So getting through that process, it all has to happen in the very, very near future because we are literally running out of time to make that decision. So part of the conversation last night was to come to this committee and get some understanding of what this committee's jurisdiction is supposed to be about, but also to work into the capital bill before it leaves the building, a conversation to allow BGS to swap 2 Aiken with 133 State Street, 5th floor.
Thank you, Senator Benning. Follow up,
No, thank
Representative.
you. Thank you.
Representative Ansel.
I have two questions, one small and one large. Is the State House curator involved in the advisory committee on the State House? And if not, that's a person I assume needs to have a role in this.
I think with Friends of the State House, he's a member of that. I don't know whether they would officially appoint him to the position.
It's just
Right. It's a good flag for us, Representative Ansel.
Very active in the building and very much aware of all the historic issues and so on.
If I can interject,
Sure.
That's a really good point. And his boss is the commissioner of BGS. He's
right.
part of BGS, but
He works for buildings. Yeah.
right. But I agree. I mean, David Sheets is a real integral part of the discussion, as is historic preservation, because historic preservation looks at the regulations. The curator is not involved at the regulatory level. So you need both.
Yeah. And then my larger question is that in terms, I think I'm just not understanding yet, I'm trying to understand what the relationship between the State House Advisory Committee, I keep looking at my notes so I can get the name right, is to joint rules and to this body. And it sounded as though it was replacing those two entities, but I don't think that's what you meant. So I'm needing to understand the relationship.
Yes, thank you, Representative Ansel. And this is a really important matter that the speaker and I are also trying to get really clear on. And the thought was not to replace that decision-making authority that we have and that Joint Rules has, is to figure out what are those pieces of this that we can delegate to them that does not, relinquish, us of our authority. And so there will be decision points that will have to come for us and before Joint Rules. Absolutely. And I think actually Carolyn Wesley sent me each of those charges last night and I was mulling through it. I'm be meeting with Secretary Bloomer, and I know the speaker will be meeting with Betsy Ann Rask for us to get clarity on that. So thank you for clarifying that. One of the things that is going to be a decision point for us coming up pretty quickly is the issue around technology and approving the money for Mike Ferrand, for oh my gosh, Kevin Moore, to spend on technology. There's going to be quite a few technology pieces that we're going to have to move on. So absolutely. Thank you for that reminder. So conscious of the time, Senator Kitchell.
Yeah, we've got a lot of people involved. I think it's at some point decisions have to be made. And I think we need to be clear where that decision point is. Because I'm just thinking about when it was radon, we all got closed down for radon. That's what the committee rooms had. Is that right?
Oh, right.
I forgot.
Yes. Yep.
Somebody moved fast on that. And I don't know how the decisions were made. And I guess it wasn't alterations in the same way, but I think when you've got all these players, the question really becomes one of how information flows, but ultimately where the decision-making resides, because time is really important here. I think Joe mentioned that. And we haven't got a whole lot of time. So that's the one thing I would be clear, because otherwise groups will be offended. I thought that was in my jurisdiction, et cetera. And I think we, if anything, clarity around who is doing what and where the ultimate decisions will get made needs to be made very clear.
I agree, and very clear and very quickly.
I had originally, if I could just kick in there, Jane,
Sure.
I had originally thought this committee should be the one making the call until I realized that Alice was not on this committee. And then joint rules came up, but it didn't quite fit with rule making, as when you're talking about building spaces and whatnot. So I guess for clarity purposes, I would hope that we could at least narrow it down to this committee and the capital complex committee, because too many cooks are going to be just killing us for getting things accomplished.
And to just bring up another thread related to this, which is implied in what Senator Kitchell said, which is there are decisions around, for example, how is technology going to be employed post-pandemic? What will that look like in committee rooms? What will that look like on the floor of the House, the floor of the Senate? Those kinds of things are going to have to come also before joint rules. That's how we organize ourselves. And also what governs us is the Constitution, which says the doors of the State House must be open, whether they are virtual doors or not. So we do understand what a minefield this is, and we want to get it right. Representative Ansel.
So I'm going to regret making this suggestion, but I'll do it anyway because that's what I do. Is this a time when we need to set up a different committee to make these decisions that has representatives from these different groups and is charged with this particular responsibility? And does that make more sense than trying to bootstrap our way along? Jane is shaking her head.
I think, well, I don't know. It seems like so much of what we do is not going to have the perfect alignment with committee chairs. This just happens to be one where Alice is not on. I think that we have to look to the work groups to provide recommendations, and then ultimately, if this is the right committee, we decide then. Those recommendations get reviewed and ultimately decisions are made. But that work underneath can be more expansive in terms of who's involved, and it helps inform ultimately the recommendations and the decisions that get made by, if it's this committee or joint rules or whatever.
Representative Ansel.
So thank you. That makes sense. And maybe the suggestion should be that there should be some clarity about who decides, and that could be part of the capital bill, and whatever group that is, let's just say so. I'm afraid that if we leave things as they are, where there's some murky boundaries, we're going to end up in trouble. So not necessarily a new group, but some clarity, and make a decision and say, this is the group that's going to make the final decision about it.
I agree. And I would propose, I see the time, I will get to you in just a moment, Representative LeClaire. I would propose that we try to find, it sounds like Joe's coming back. I would propose that we try to meet again as a group before the weekend, if possible. I know it's going to be hard to find time in common, but I think we need to get clarity on this. So Joe, what I was just saying is, the committee, it sounds like, would feel much more comfortable if we had some language that would go into the capital bill, having it spell out exactly the decision-making bodies around various parts of this, and so it's not murky. And I was saying, I think we need, as a group of joint legislative management, coming back before the weekend so that we're all on the same page around this. So, and I see the time, so I'm going to go to Representative LeClaire.
Okay, very quickly, just to pick up on Janet's, I think we need to take a look as a group about using subcommittees for this group as well.
Agreed. Okay, Representative Emmons.
I just want to be clear that with this legislative advisory committee would sort of be the gatekeeper or the pass-through where they would make recommendations. And it's the question, where do those recommendations go? The advisory committee wouldn't make those final decisions. They'd make the recommendations. So the key is, where does that recommendation go?
Agreed. So I'm going to ask Mike Ferrant, once we're off, to send out a doodle poll to all of us to try to figure out how we can meet up again, hopefully on Friday. And at this point, Thank you very much, Representative Emmons, for joining us and also for doing that work with Senator Benning and us yesterday. Much appreciated. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. All those in favor signify by